They called her the medic, a woman of bandages and quiet corners, until the day the mountains screamed and the cannons of men fell silent. They mocked her for listening to stones, until the greatest warrior among them handed her his half-inch caliber rifle, not as a request, but as a surrender. This was how a ghost in a medic's uniform taught a battalion that the most profound battles are won not with fury, but with physics, and the deadliest weapon is a mind that can hear the earth's killing whisper. Forward. Operating base. Aethelgard was a wound scraped into the earth. It clung to the shoulder of a nameless peak in a range that cartographers had colored with warnings and soldiers had named with curses. The air here was a thief, thin and sharp, stealing breath from the lungs and warmth from the blood. It was an atmosphere of pure survival, stripped of all sentiment. The silence was the most oppressive feature, a physical weight that pressed down on the corrugated metal roofs of the HAB units and seeped through the triple-layered canvas of the command tent. It was not an absence of sound, but a presence of immense geological quiet. The mountains, a jagged crown of Precambrian granite and metamorphic schist, were not merely a landscape. They were an entity, and their silence was a coiled thing, waiting. Inside the perimeter, the air tasted of diesel fumes, ozone from the humming servers, and the metallic tang of constant, low-grade fear. Specialist Anya Sharma felt the mountain more than she saw it. From her corner in the Strategic Operations Center, a place she was only grudgingly tolerated, she perceived the world not through the thermal optics or satellite feeds that obsessed the others, but through a different set of senses. Her domain was a bank of monitors displaying information no one else understood: seismographic squiggles, acoustic propagation models, and gravimetric anomalies. Data flowed from a network of discrete sensors she had personally calibrated, drilled deep into the bedrock of the surrounding peaks. To the soldiers who hurried past, she was just the medic, a small, quiet woman with dark, analytical eyes who seemed to be perpetually lost in a world of meaningless charts. They saw the red cross on her sleeve and dismissed the complex universe unfolding on her screens. They did not know that she was listening to the tectonic stresses, the subtle groans of rock under pressure, the way sound bent and warped through fissures of quartz and feldspar. She was charting the mountain's anatomy, learning its secrets. Her fingers moved with economical grace across a holographic display, tracing the intricate lattice of a contour map. The light from the projection cast a blue, ethereal glow on her face, making her seem detached, almost spectral. She was cataloging microfractures, cross-referencing acoustic reflections with ground-penetrating radar scans. She had identified a series of interconnected lava tubes and limestone caverns, a subterranean vascular system hidden beneath the impassive stone face of the range. The mountain had a voice, a language of vibration and resonance, and she was its sole interpreter. While others prepared for a war of ballistics and brute force, she was preparing for a war of frequencies and geology. Her posture was one of absolute focus, a stillness that was unnerving in the nervous energy of the SOC. She was an anomaly, a scholar in a room of hammers, and the hammers did not know what to make of her. The fragile peace of the SOC was shattered by the arrival of Lieutenant Commander Thorne. He did not walk into a room, he occupied it, his presence a concussive force that displaced the air and commanded attention. He was a man built of broad certainties and loud opinions, his voice a blunt instrument he used to hammer home his authority. His square jaw was set in a permanent state of aggressive conviction, and his eyes, the color of washed-out denim, swept the room with an impatient, proprietary gaze. He was new to Ethelgard, sent to inject aggressive dominance into what High Command perceived as a stagnant front. He saw the world in terms of clear enemies and decisive action. Nuance was a form of weakness, and data that did not confirm his pre-existing beliefs was an irritant. Thorn's boots hammered against the steel plate flooring, a rhythmic, intimidating beat that announced his tour of the command center. He moved with the swagger of a man who had never been proven wrong, or who had at least never been forced to admit it. His gaze landed on Sharma's station, and his brow furrowed in a mask of theatrical confusion. He saw the medic's insignia on her arm and the esoteric data on her screens, and the two things did not compute in his rigidly structured worldview. He strode over, the scent of strong coffee and self-assurance preceding him. He loomed over her, a mountain of flesh and ego casting a shadow over her world of light and numbers. The hum of the servers seemed to dip, the nervous chatter of the comms officers falling silent as they sensed the impending collision of two fundamentally different worlds. The morning briefing was Thorn's stage, and he played his part with practiced bravado. He stood before the central holographic map of the sector, a red laser pointer stabbing at areas he designated for proactive engagement. His strategy was simple, a doctrine of overwhelming force. He wanted more patrols, deeper reconnaissance, a more visible and threatening posture to intimidate the insurgents into inaction. He spoke of battlefields, of kill zones and lines of fire. Sharma, standing at the back of the room as required, saw something else. She saw a man pointing a sword at an ocean, ignorant of the tide. His plans were based on the surface of the earth, on what could be seen. Her understanding was of the depths, of the unseen structures that dictated the true nature of this war. Thorn finished his monologue and swept his gaze across the assembled officers and NCOs, daring any of them to question his unassailable logic. His eyes snagged on Sharma again, a persistent anomaly he felt compelled to correct. He pointed the laser, its crimson dot landing squarely on her chest. The room, already tense, became perfectly still. "You," he barked, the word a physical slap. "Specialist, the medic." He gestured dismissively toward her forgotten corner of the SOC. "I'm told you spend your days playing with charts and graphs. What exactly is a medic doing with my tactical sensor grid?" The question was not a question. It was an accusation, a public dissection designed to humiliate and reinforce his own dominance. A few of the younger recruits, eager to align themselves with the new power structure, snickered audibly. They saw what Thorn wanted them to see: a medic who had wandered out of her lane, a woman playing with toys she could not possibly understand. They saw her unassuming frame, her lack of battlefield bluster, and drew the easy, comfortable conclusion of her incompetence. The collective judgment of the room pressed in on her, a palpable wave of dismissal. Anya Sharma did not flinch. She did not look at Thorn or at the smirking faces in the crowd. Her gaze remained distant, focused on something far beyond the canvas walls of the tent, on the silent stone titans that surrounded them. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but carried a strange weight, a resonance that cut through the tension. It was devoid of emotion, a simple statement of fact. "The mountain is talking, sir." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, dense and strange. "I am listening." The simplicity of her response was more infuriating to Thorne than any direct challenge could have been. It was enigmatic, impenetrable. It was a language he did not speak, and therefore could not dominate. He saw it as insolence, a deliberate act of insubordination wrapped in cryptic nonsense. His face flushed a dark, mottled red. "The mountain is talking?" he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is that so? Well, while you're having your little chat with the geology, the rest of us will be fighting a war." He turned his back on her, a gesture of final dismissal. "From now on, specialist, you will confine your activities to the medical tent. Your job is to patch holes in people, not to stare at squiggly lines. Count bandages, sterilize equipment. Do whatever it is you medics do, but you are to stay away from my SOC. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," Sharma replied. The words were a formality, a required sound. They held no acquiescence. She had already heard what she needed to hear, not from Thorne, but from the deep, resonant hum of the earth. A new pattern had emerged in the last hour, a subtle but distinct shift in the seismic background noise. It was a rhythm, too organized to be natural. It was the cadence of careful, deliberate work, of digging, of placement. The mountain was indeed talking, and it was telling her that something was coming. Thorne had just made himself deaf, and in doing so, had blinded them all. She returned to the medical tent, a sterile white space that smelled of antiseptic and packaged gauze. It was a world of reactive measures, of repairing damage already done. She moved through the space with a practiced efficiency, her hands checking inventory, her mind miles away, deep within the cold, dark rock. She could feel the vibrations through the soles of her boots, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor that no one else noticed. It was like feeling the pulse of a patient slipping into shock. The base was the patient, and its heart was about to fail. Thorne's order was a gag on the one person who could hear the diagnosis. She obeyed the letter of his command, but her mind remained connected to her sensors, replaying the data streams in her memory, analyzing the shift in harmonic frequencies. The enemy wasn't coming for them. They were already here. They were simply waiting for the right moment to announce their presence. The moment arrived 3 days later, at 0400 hours, when the cold was at its most vicious and the thin air bit like acid. It began not with a bang, but with a whistle, a single descending shriek that ended in a deafening crack as a mortar round impacted the primary comms array. The explosion was a brutal fist punching through the oppressive silence. Then a second round hit the motor pool, and a third landed squarely on the perimeter wall. Chaos erupted, a symphony of shouted orders, panicked running, and the guttural roar of the base's automated defense guns firing blindly into the darkness. This was not a random barrage. The precision was supernatural. The rounds walked across the FOB with methodical, intelligent cruelty, targeting critical infrastructure with an accuracy that suggested perfect, real-time intelligence. They hit the backup generator, the water purification unit, the ammunition depot. It was as if the enemy had a blueprint of the base and was dismantling it piece by piece. The attacks were coming from the direction of the main ridge, the obvious tactical high ground, but from a dozen different points simultaneously, a feat that should have been impossible to coordinate so perfectly. In the SOC, Thorne was a caged animal. He bellowed orders, his voice raw with fury and a growing thread of panic. "Return fire! Quadrant 4-9er! Saturate the ridge!" The base's own mortars coughed to life, sending shells arcing into the night, chasing ghosts. Explosions blossomed against the dark rock of the mountainside, spectacular and utterly useless. The incoming fire did not slow. If anything, it became more accurate, as if their own muzzle flashes were being used to refine the enemy's targeting solutions. Thorn's strategy, his doctrine of overwhelming force, was a clumsy, flailing response to a precise and surgical attack. He was trying to swat a swarm of wasps with a baseball bat, and his every swing only made them angrier. The men and women of Ethelgard were disciplined, well-trained. They fought back with courage and professionalism, but they were fighting an enemy they couldn't see, an enemy that knew every move they were about to make. The FOB's defenses, designed for a conventional assault, were being systematically circumvented. The enemy wasn't playing by the rules. They weren't using the terrain. They were part of it. Thorn's face, illuminated by the flickering red lights of the tactical display, was a mask of grim disbelief. His worldview was cracking, the solid certainties of his military education crumbling under the weight of an attack that defied all conventional logic. His commands grew more desperate, his voice tighter. He was losing control, not just of the battle, but of himself. The orthodox solution had failed. Brute force was a child's tantrum against the cold, hard physics of the mountain. Anya Sharma felt the first impact not as a sound, but as a spike in her data feed, which she was monitoring on a small encrypted tablet inside the medical tent. The physical shockwave reached her a moment later, a dull thud that vibrated through the floor. The subsequent explosions were a staccato rhythm of sharp, high-frequency spikes on her acoustic sensors. But she wasn't looking at the impacts. She was looking at the origins. The sound wasn't traveling through the air in a straight line from the ridge. It was being channeled, funneled through the rock itself. The seismic data confirmed it. Each launch registered as a cluster of micro-vibrations that originated from deep inside the mountain, not on its surface. Her theory had been correct. The enemy was using the network of caves she had mapped. They had turned the mountain into a massive, natural gun barrel, a geological resonance chamber that masked their exact locations and amplified the force of their attacks. The medical tent was beginning to fill with the wounded. She worked with a calm, detached efficiency, applying tourniquets, dressing wounds, her hands steady even as the world outside tore itself apart. But her mind was elsewhere, processing the implications of her data. Thorn's counter-barrage was worse than useless. It was actively harmful. The explosions on the surface of the ridge were creating seismic noise, a chaotic wash of vibrations that made it even harder for her to pinpoint the enemy's launch sites. He was inadvertently providing them with cover, blinding his only set of eyes that could truly see. She had to act. She handed a pressure bandage to another medic, her movements clipped and precise. "Keep pressure," she commanded, her voice steady. Then she turned and walked out of the relative safety of the medical tent and into the maelstrom. Shrapnel hissed through the air. The ground shuddered with each new impact. She walked through the chaos as if she were insulated from it, her focus absolute. Her destination was the SOC, the source of the failed strategy, the place where Thorn's ego was getting more people killed with every passing second. She was breaking his direct order, but protocol had become a luxury they could no longer afford. She entered the SOC to a scene of controlled pandemonium. Thorn was screaming at a communications officer, his face contorted with rage. The holographic map was a chaotic mess of red icons and failed counterattacks. No one noticed her enter at first. She was just a shadow slipping through the chaos. She walked directly to the central command console, her expression unreadable. With a few keystrokes, she seized control of the holographic display. Thorne's tactical map vanished, replaced by her own stark, complex world of geological strata and acoustic propagation lines. The room fell silent, the only sound Thorne's choked-off shout of fury. The new map was alien to them. It showed the mountain range in cross-section, a vibrant, color-coded diagram of rock density, fault lines, and seismic activity. Bright red lines pulsed from deep within the main ridge, showing the paths the mortar launch sounds were taking through the rock. Blue circles pinpointed the source, not on the surface, but hundreds of feet inside, in the network of caverns she had discovered. She pointed a steady finger at a convergence of red lines. "They are not on the ridge," she said, her voice cutting through the remaining tension like a scalpel. "They are in it. It's a basaltic lava tube system. The igneous rock is dense. It contains the initial blast signature, and the hollow tubes act as a natural acoustic lens scattering the sound." "You're shooting at echoes, sir." Thorne stared at her, his mouth opening and closing silently. Disbelief warred with the undeniable failure of his own methods. For a moment, it seemed he would have her arrested on the spot. But before he could speak, another voice cut in, low and steady. "What do you need?" It was Chief Petty Officer Kai, the lead SEAL attached to the FOB. He was a man carved from the same granite as the mountains, his face a roadmap of hard-won experience. He had been standing silently in a corner, observing Thorne's meltdown with a stoic, assessing gaze. He had seen Sharma's quiet diligence in the weeks past. He had seen the sneering dismissal from the other recruits, and now he saw the undeniable logic flowering in the center of the room. He saw a solution where Thorne saw only insubordination. In that moment, with that simple question, the hierarchy of the room fractured. Authority, real authority, bled away from the man with the rank and flowed to the woman with the answer. Sharma turned her attention to Kai, her focus absolute. She recognized in him a fellow professional, someone who valued results over rhetoric. "I need one shot," she said, her voice dropping to a clinical, precise tone. She manipulated the holographic display, zooming in on a different mountain face, a secondary peak miles away from the current fighting, a place that seemed completely irrelevant to the battle. A small, seemingly insignificant outcrop of rock was highlighted with a glowing green circle. "The cave system they're using has a structural vulnerability, a keystone formation in this adjacent peak. The entire network is geologically unstable, held in equilibrium by this one point of compressive stress," she continued, her explanation a torrent of technical data that was both baffling and mesmerizing to the onlookers. "It's a pegmatite intrusion, rich in feldspar and mica. It's brittle. A sufficient kinetic impact, delivered at the correct vector, will induce a resonance cascade. The vibrations will propagate along a Class II fault line that runs directly through the primary cavern. It won't be an explosion. It will be a controlled seismic event. The cavern will collapse on itself." She looked from the map to Kai. "I need a single round, high caliber, high velocity. A checkmate." It was not a plan of attack. It was a physics problem. It was elegant, intellectual, and utterly alien to Thorne's philosophy of warfare. Kai stared at the display, his mind rapidly processing the insane, brilliant logic of it. An impossible shot, at a target that wasn't a target, to create an effect that was more earthquake than explosion. He nodded slowly, a single, decisive gesture. He turned to his designated marksman, a young SEAL named Miller, who carried the team's M107A1 Barrett, the .50 caliber special application scoped rifle. "Miller, give her the stick." Miller hesitated, his eyes wide. He looked from his chief to the small, unassuming medic. The rifle was a monstrous piece of engineering, weighing over 30 pounds, its recoil capable of dislocating a shoulder. It was an expert's weapon. He looked at Sharma, at her slight frame, and saw a complete disconnect. But Kai's expression was unyielding. The chief trusted her, and that was enough. With a sense of profound disbelief, Miller unslung the heavy rifle and held it out, but Kai held up a hand, stopping him. He had seen the complex firing solution now materializing on Sharma's tablet, a dizzying array of numbers accounting for barometric pressure, Coriolis drift, spin drift, and a dozen variables he didn't even recognize related to geological density and harmonic frequencies. This was not a marksman's shot, it was a surgeon's. Kai looked at Miller, then back at Sharma. He knew what was required. He walked over to Miller and took the massive rifle from him. The weight settled into his own powerful frame with familiar ease. He walked back to Sharma, the weapon held in his hands. He looked at the impossible calculation on her screen, then into her calm, certain eyes. He knew his own limits. He was one of the best snipers in the world, but this was beyond him. This was a different science. In a gesture that would be retold in hushed, awed tones for years, he held the Barrett M107A1 out to her, offering it butt first. He said nothing. The act was a statement more powerful than any words. It was the ultimate admission of faith. It was a transfer of power, a warrior acknowledging a higher form of expertise. Anya Sharma took the rifle. Her hands closed around the cold, familiar polymer and steel. The weapon seemed impossibly large in her grasp, yet she held it with an easy, practiced balance that stunned the onlookers. There was no hesitation. She slung the rifle over her shoulder, the weight seeming to have no effect on her posture. She picked up her tablet and walked towards the exit of the SOC. "I have a firing position plotted 200 meters east of here," she said to Kai, not looking back. "I'll need you to spot. The time to target will be approximately 11.2 seconds. I will need you to confirm the impact signature via my sensors." Kai simply nodded and fell into step behind her, his own rifle now slung over his back. He had become the subordinate. He had become the witness. They moved through the chaotic, fire-lit darkness of the FOB. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burnt cordite. Sharma moved with an unnerving calm, her path weaving through the debris with an efficiency that suggested she was not reacting to the chaos, but moving through a pre-calculated route. They reached a small, protected revetment, a position she had identified days earlier for its clear line of sight and stable bedrock foundation. She didn't just see the terrain, she understood its composition. This spot would not shift or vibrate when she fired, ensuring the perfect transmission of force from the rifle to the bullet. She set up the rifle, her movements fluid and economical. She laid down the bipod, settled the stock into her shoulder, and connected her tablet to the rifle's advanced ballistic scope. The complex firing solution she had calculated now appeared as an overlay on the scope's view. She was not just aiming at a rock. She was aiming at a single point in space and time, a nexus of physics and geology. She lay prone, becoming part of the earth beneath her. She felt the vibrations of the battle not as a distraction, but as part of the equation. The wind whispered past, and she factored its subtle shifts into her calculations instinctively. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate dropping until it was a slow, steady beat. The world narrowed to the view through the scope, to the numbers on the display, and to the feel of the cold trigger beneath her finger. Kai lay beside her, his own high-powered spotter scope trained on the distant, dark shape of the target mountain. He could barely make out the outcrop she had designated. It looked like any other piece of rock. He focused on his task, ready to relay the impact data from the sensors Sharma had slaved to his own wrist-mounted display. He felt a profound sense of surreality. He was spotting for a medic who was about to fire a .50 caliber rifle at a mountain to cause a localized earthquake. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. He had placed his faith and the fate of the entire base in the hands of this quiet, enigmatic woman. "Firing," Sharma said. Her voice was a flat, calm statement. There was no emotion, no tension. It was the voice of a scientist beginning an experiment. She exhaled slowly, and in the silent pause between heartbeats, she squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared, a deafening, concussive blast that seemed to momentarily silence the entire battle. The recoil, which would have thrown a lesser person off their feet, was absorbed by her body in a smooth, controlled motion. The massive .50 BMG round, a finger-sized piece of machined brass and lead, tore through the night sky, a hypersonic messenger of physics. 11 seconds. An eternity. The battle seemed to hold its breath. Thorne, watching from the shattered doorway of the SOC, held his. The recruits, huddled behind cover, held theirs. Then, on Kai's wrist display, a single, sharp spike appeared. "Impact confirmed," he breathed into his comms. For a moment, nothing else happened. The distant mountain remained inert, a dark silhouette against the pre-dawn sky. A wave of doubt washed over the base. Thorne let out a short, bitter laugh, a sound of cynical vindication. It had been a lunatic's gambit, a shot in the dark. Then a low rumble began. It was not a sound, but a feeling, a deep, resonant vibration that grew from the soles of their feet upwards. It was the groan of 1 billion tons of rock being forced to move against its will. A faint plume of dust, almost invisible in the darkness, puffed from the side of the distant mountain. The rumbling grew louder, evolving into a grinding, tearing roar. The entire face of the target peak seemed to shimmer, then liquefy. A colossal slab of granite, a piece of the mountain the size of a battleship, detached and began to slide. The rock slide was a slow-motion avalanche of unimaginable power, a silent, unstoppable tide of stone that poured down into the valley that separated the peaks. The roar of the rock slide became the only sound in the world, a force of nature unleashed by a single, perfectly placed bullet. And then, as the last of the debris settled into the valley floor, a new sound emerged. Silence. A profound, absolute quiet. The incoming mortar fire had stopped. Not paused. Stopped. The silence that followed was heavier, more complete than the one that had preceded the battle. It was the silence of a problem solved, the silence of a threat neutralized, the silence of checkmate. Sharma's single shot hadn't just targeted the enemy, it had targeted the battlefield itself. She had not fought the enemy. She had taken their sanctuary and turned it into their tomb, sealing the entire cave system under 100,000 tons of granite. In the aftermath, the survivors of FOB Aethelgard moved like ghosts through the wreckage of their base. The silence was unnerving. They looked towards the ridge where the attacks had come from, and then towards the distant, newly scarred mountain face, and tried to reconcile the two. They looked at Specialist Sharma, the medic, who was now calmly field stripping the massive rifle, cleaning it with a methodical precision that was more terrifying than any battle cry. She was no longer just the medic. She was an architect of destruction, a wielder of forces they could not comprehend. A crackle of static broke the stillness. It came from the SOC's primary comms, the one they thought had been destroyed. It was a high-priority, encrypted channel, suddenly clear as a bell. A voice, calm and measured, filled the command tent. "Ethelgard Actual, this is Fleet Command. Acknowledge." The voice was old, laced with the quiet authority of someone who had seen everything. Thorn, his face pale and slack with shock, stumbled to the console. This is Ethelgard Actual," he stammered. We sustained a heavy, coordinated attack, but have neutralized the threat." "We are aware, Commander," the voice from the speaker replied, a distinct lack of surprise in its tone. "I have the full data stream from Project Chimera. I have watched the entire engagement in real time. I know exactly what happened." There was a cold pause. "I also know that you ordered the project lead to confine herself to the medical tent and to cease her work." The temperature in the SOC seemed to drop by 20 degrees. Thorne's face went from pale to ashen. He tried to speak, but no words came out. The Admiral's voice became a blade of ice. "Lieutenant Commander Thorne, your command philosophy is predicated on a brand of kinetic bullying that has no place in the modern battle space. You were given command of our most advanced intelligence-gathering outpost, and your first act was to silence your primary intelligence asset. You have demonstrated a catastrophic failure of judgment. You are relieved of command, effective immediately. Chief Petty Officer Kai will assume temporary command of Ethelgard. You will confine yourself to your quarters and await transport. Do not speak to anyone. Is that understood?" "Yes, Admiral," Thorne whispered. The word was the sound of a career, a worldview, and an ego disintegrating. Then the Admiral's voice softened, the hard edge vanishing completely. "Dr. Sharma, are you there?" the title echoed in the silent tent. Doctor, not specialist. The remaining officers and NCOs turned as one to look at Sharma, who had just finished reassembling the rifle and was now wiping her hands on a cloth. Their perception of her shifted, tilted, and then shattered completely, reforming into something new, something full of awe and a considerable amount of fear. She was not one of them. She had never been one of them. She was something other. Sharma walked to the console and keyed the microphone. "I'm here, Admiral," she said, her voice as calm and steady as ever. "An exemplary field validation, Doctor," the Admiral said. "Your resonance cascade model performed not just within acceptable parameters, but perfectly. For the record," he continued, his voice now broadcasting to every comms unit on the base, "Dr. Anya Sharma is the chief architect and lead geophysicist for Project Chimera. Her rank is a cover for security purposes. She is on site to validate her theoretical models on acoustic warfare and geological denial strategies. As of this moment, her theories are now proven doctrine. She has full tactical and strategic oversight on all matters pertaining to her field of expertise. All personnel are to afford her any and all support she requires. Is that understood by everyone?" A scattered chorus of "Yes, Admiral," and "Sir" echoed through the tent. The validation was absolute. The reckoning was complete. In the days that followed, a new order settled over FOB Ethelgard. Thorne was gone, evacuated on a pre-dawn transport, a disgraced ghost. The silence that remained was not the oppressive, waiting silence of before, but a quiet born of respect. Awe. The soldiers and SEALs moved with a new purpose. They still saw Sharma as an outsider, but not as an inferior. They saw her as a force of nature, as unknowable and powerful as the mountain she commanded. They gave her a wide berth, not out of fear of what she would do to them, but out of fear that they might be found wanting in her analytical gaze. She showed no pleasure in her victory, no satisfaction in Thorne's downfall. She simply returned to her work, her screens once again filled with the esoteric language of the earth. The quiet acknowledgement came 2 days later. The sun was just beginning to crest the newly reshaped mountains, casting long, sharp shadows across the valley. Sharma was at her station, analyzing the post-collapse seismic data. The mountain was settling, groaning into its new shape. Kai approached her, moving with his usual quiet confidence. He didn't speak for a long moment, simply watching the data flow across her screen. He did not offer praise or congratulations. Such words would have been cheap, insufficient for what she had done. Instead, he placed a steaming mug of black coffee on the console beside her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it was laden with meaning. It was an offering, a recognition. "The mountain is quiet," he said, his voice a low rumble. Anya Sharma did not look up from her screen. A small, almost imperceptible nod was her only reply. "For now," she said. It was all that needed to be said. An understanding passed between them, a bond forged not in combat, but in a shared respect for a deeper, more profound kind of power. He was the warrior of the surface, she the master of the depths. Together, they had achieved the impossible. He nodded once more and left her to her work, the offering of coffee a silent testament to the new hierarchy, one based not on rank, but on undeniable, terrifying competence. Her work was done. The model was validated, the enemy neutralized, the lesson taught. Weeks later, a single Black Hawk helicopter descended into the FOB, its rotors kicking up dust and memories. Sharma emerged from the SOC, carrying the same single unassuming duffel bag with which she had arrived. She wore the same plain fatigues, the medic patch still on her sleeve, a piece of camouflage she no longer needed but had not bothered to remove. She boarded the helicopter without a word, without a single look back at the men and women she had saved, or at the mountain she had broken. She left as she had come, a ghost. But she left behind a legend, a story that would be whispered from one rotation to the next. The story of the quiet medic who listened to stones. They learned that the true nature of power is often silent, that the most effective weapon is not the one that makes the loudest noise, but the one that understands the frequency of the world. Anya Sharma was gone, but her lesson remained, etched into the rock and into the memory of every soul at Fob Ethelgard. They had been saved not by a soldier, but by a scholar, and they now knew to listen for the whispers of the earth, for the quiet professionals who walked among them, seeing a reality that was deeper and infinitely more dangerous than their own. Her legacy was not one of glory, but of a profound and lonely quiet. The quiet of a mind that had mastered a mountain,